All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a massive paradigm shift. We're going to look at how escaping the trap of modern legacy media, especially when it comes to solving absolutely critical economic issues, actually requires the creation of an entirely new, unmediated digital infrastructure. So, let's jump right in. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the legacy media trap, the wealth tax blockade, the rise of network states, sovereign digital infrastructure, and finally, decentralizing the debate. It's a fascinating journey that takes us from viral television clashes over economics straight down into the cold, deterministic reality of Web3 architecture. You'll see exactly how these two seemingly different worlds connect. Section 1. The legacy media trap. To really understand this trap, our sources focus on a guy named Gary Stevenson. He's a former multimillionaire city trader who turned into an inequality economist. He's constantly clashing with legacy media figures while trying to explain our modern economy. Stevenson is on this mission to explain the structural issues of wealth inequality, but, he just keeps hitting a very specific, solid wall whenever he steps into a traditional television studio. To give you an idea of that wall, during a televised debate about wealth inequality, broadcaster Piers Morgan continuously pressed Stevenson with a pretty revealing question. He asked, "How rich are you?" "I will tell you how much I'm worth." According to our sources, this captures the problem perfectly. It just perfectly illustrates how the legacy media format fundamentally operates. It prioritizes personal conflict, salacious questions, and these little gotcha moments over actual, nuanced economic education. And Stevenson's reaction to this whole environment is incredibly telling. He says, "I'm tired of the Gary Stevenson gossip show. I wish I could come on here and we could have a sensible, intelligent conversation about economics." Stevenson argues this setup deliberately traps real economic analysis inside what is essentially a passive entertainment product. In these formats, incredibly complex systemic issues are just boiled down to a shouting match. He notes that this effectively acts as a closed loop that protects the elite, or what he calls the posh boys club. I mean, if you can't have a serious, uninterrupted explanation of how wealth moves through society, the status quo is never genuinely examined, right? It just becomes reality TV. So heavily frustrated by this mediated gatekeeping and the sheer inability to just have a rigorous debate, Stevenson took action. He bypassed the legacy television systems completely and built an independent YouTube channel. And get this, it now reaches over 1.6 million subscribers. By building his own platform, he leverages direct, independent media to reach people without a middleman filtering or dramatizing the analysis. He built this massive following to bypass that posh boys club entirely. Which brings us to Section 2, the wealth tax blockade. Let's look at how this media trap directly impacts actual policy. Why is it practically impossible to have a functional, honest debate on Stevenson's main policy focus, a wealth tax, on these traditional platforms? Well, the debate is utterly deadlocked in the legacy sphere. You have proponents like Stevenson and economist Gabriel Zuckman who argue a wealth tax is mathematically necessary to prevent exploding poverty. On the flip side, critics, such as tax expert Dan Needle, argue it's impractical, it's logistically flawed, and it's just going to drive away investment. But here is the static point our sources identify. When critics highlight these practical issues, traditional media uses them to kill the conversation entirely. Instead of using those criticisms as a starting point to actually troubleshoot and design a workable policy, boom, they're just used as a weapon to end the discussion right there. For instance, critics like the IEA's Christian Humitz maintain that the top 1% holds 22% of the wealth. And he points out that this figure has been relatively flat for decades, meaning a wealth tax isn't the silver bullet its proponents claim it is. Now, regardless of which side of the economic aisle you sit on, the structural problem remains exactly the same. Legacy media formats simply do not allow for a deep dive into these numbers or how to fix the logistical hurdles. They just pit two sides against each other for views and nothing gets solved. So that leaves us with a massive question for today's explainer. If the bloated, conflict-driven formats of legacy media prevent real problem-solving and honest debate about vital policies, where does that debate actually happen? How do we go about building a completely alternative space? Section 3. The rise of network states. The answer to building that alternative space might actually lie in a fascinating conceptual framework popularized by tech entrepreneur Balaji Srinivasan. Srinivasan defines a network state as a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory and eventually gains diplomatic recognition. It completely flips the traditional nation model right on its head. Instead of starting with physical land and a shared ancestry, it starts entirely in the digital cloud. It organizes people around a shared moral innovation or purpose before eventually manifesting in physical space. It's a real game changer of an idea. Now, within this broader concept, there's the idea of a one network. Think of this as a proto-nation built around a single influencer or creator. According to the source material, an influencer's massive following, like Gary Stevenson's 1.6 million independent subscribers, acts exactly like this. It's a one network. It's a community that already has a shared context, a shared history of learning together, and a recognized leader. It's essentially an embryonic community already capable of collective action. And this is the blueprint for bypassing the legacy posh boys club. You don't ask them for airtime. You just build a massive independent network that literally doesn't need them. Section 4, Sovereign Digital Infrastructure. Because here's the catch. To make a one network truly sovereign, you can't just rely on rented digital space forever. To execute real economic action independently, you need a deep, unmediated foundation. We have to look at the old world versus the new world. Side 1 is legacy media, centralized elites, and bloated graphical user interfaces, or GUIs. Side 2 is independent creators, network states, and streamlined command line interfaces, or CLIs. The sources argue we must move away from the passive GUI dead end, which honestly perfectly mirrors legacy television's passive entertainment product. Clicking shiny buttons on a centralized platform is just as mediated as watching a TV producer's heavily curated show. We have to embrace the unmediated, deterministic reality of independent protocols. Basically, we have to stop being passive consumers and start being active architects. And this is exactly where the theory meets the tech. New Web3 protocols like ERC-7827 give these communities a verifiable way to operate without needing a centralized tech monarch. Now, what does this highly technical standard actually mean for you and me? Essentially, it acts as a highly secure, unchangeable digital ledger. It uses single-entry bookkeeping directly on a blockchain. Why does that matter? Because it mathematically secures a community's debate and its records. You aren't trusting some massive media corporation to moderate the discussion or dictate the rules. The network keeps its own flawless, transparent record. By using what the sources call a semiotic bridge, human intent is flawlessly translated into action. Again, stripping away the jargon here, this means that instead of a media company translating what they think you want, this technology allows your direct, written commands to be executed flawlessly by the network. First, human intent starts in our messy, associative brains. Second, structured text translates that intent via an agentic typewriter, meaning you write explicit, direct commands. Finally, the hardware executes exact physical logic. By stripping away those bloated graphical interfaces that are always trying to guess what we want, we ensure our complex ideas execute exactly as we intended them to. Finally, Section 5, Decentralizing the Debate. Let's connect this deeply technical infrastructure right back to Stevenson's frustration. If we want an honest, practical discussion about complex policies like a wealth tax, we need an infrastructure that simply cannot be shut down by gatekeepers or turned into cheap reality TV. Through cryptographic signatures, these decentralized communities create an immutable record of sweat. What is that? It's cryptographic proof of actual, physical, human effort and work, stored verifiably on-chain. It bypasses the probabilistic guesswork of AI, and it bypasses the rumor-based gossip of legacy media. If an economist or community puts in the rigorous work to design a policy, that effort is mathematically proven, it's verified, and it's recorded. It solves the gossip show problem entirely, because if the work is verified mathematically, an opponent can't just shout over it on a talk show to make it disappear. This brings us to a really profound point, captured by legal scholar Eben Molglin. We get the chimpanzee hitting buttons, but we chat with each other, it isn't as good. It's a great metaphor. Just as we must stop being chimpanzees passively hitting brightly colored buttons on centralized interfaces for a quick dopamine hit, Stevenson argues we absolutely must stop consuming economics as a passive, button-pushing gossip show. We are built for deep, nuanced communication, and our digital tools and our media must reflect that reality. We have to become sovereign pilots. We have to take the wheel and demand unmediated, deterministic environments to actually solve our real-world economic problems. By building decentralized influencer networks and utilizing independent digital tools, we can bypass the closed loops and those posh boys clubs of legacy media entirely. So the unmediated infrastructure to fundamentally change how we debate and solve problems is finally here, which leaves you with one powerful question based on our sources today. Are you going to succumb to the illusions of legacy media and remain a passive digital tenant? Or will you grasp the CLI, bypass the gatekeepers entirely, and take the wheel of your own digital destiny? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the architecture around you. See you next time.